to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Wendy Dillard here. Today is Thursday, January the 18th, 2018, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, your second Daily Dose of Happy for the day. And this morning, Wendy, Joel, and I did the first Daily Dose, and we agreed after the show it was probably one of the best ones that he and I had ever done together. So once again, the gauntlet has been thrown down. We have to try to match or beat it. What do you think?
You just love to raise the standard. But,
I do. It's
I'm
fun.
Always up to the challenge.
I especially like it when it's a non-threatening kind of standard, because that's the fun kind to go after. Let's see how high we can raise our vibration level. That's always fun, right?
Oh, because there's no resistance in it.
That's right. There's no resistance in it. Exactly. That's what makes it so much fun. Yes. So anyway, we thought we would talk today about the fact that there are so many people now who are discovering the law of attraction and trying to apply it in their lives. And you can find groups on it. I mean, on Facebook, there are groups with like tens of thousands of people in the group. And some of them are more active than others, of course, but the more active ones, I mean, you look at some posts, and then you look like 10 minutes later, it's a whole new list of posts, because so many different posts are coming through and so many people are responding to different things. So they're very, very active groups. But as a result of the fact that they are that many of them are relatively new to the law of attraction, some of the advice that ends up out there is a little bit not quite ideal, shall we say.
That was well said.
It was very, very softly said. But some of the advice is a little bit wacky at times, perhaps. So we thought we'd talk about some of the not so great pieces of advice that people give and what would be better alternatives. But before we do that, Wendy, do you have anything that's been really great happening in the last 24 hours? It's always tough for you and me because we do the show every day, whereas the other co-hosts, they get a week to think about it sometimes. You have to come up with it every day, you know. But anything good happened in the last 24 hours?
Yeah. Well, now what I'm going to say on the surface may sound like it's not a win.
Okay.
But, I feel like any time you turn something around from negative to positive, that is a win, especially
absolutely.
if you get new awareness.
Yeah.
Last night I started to notice I was getting kind of like cold symptoms coming on.
Oh.
And, they were not fun. And, it's like my ears started to hurt and my throat started getting a little scratchy. And so I noticed that my immediate focus went to the symptoms. And it was kind of fascinating as I think about it now how, I was so focused. Like every 3 seconds I was swallowing, or every 2 seconds I was testing, the pressure and really paying attention. And I thought, oh my gosh, how on earth am I doing that, or why am I doing that? But it just really got my attention that I was so wrapped up in it. Although I will say it didn't get my attention until well after the fact. So what I'm saying is I was really focused on these symptoms in my head last night. And, during the night I woke up and I was like, oh, my throat's a little bit sore than it was before. And I noticed like one nostril was all stuffy. And probably middle of the night, as I'm rolling around just noticing my symptoms, I went, what the heck am I doing focused on this?
Yeah.
Why is this what I focus on? I'm like the perpetual happy kind of gal who's using the law of attraction left, right, and all over to manifest some magnificent things, and I'm focusing like this?
Isn't it amazing? Oh, my goodness.
Well, and Abraham oftentimes will say to, the audience, you're sloppy thinkers.
Yeah, they do say that.
This is one of these moments where I'm like, oh, my God, I'm being a really sloppy thinker. I'm just kind of going by default. So once I had that awareness, I thought to myself, well, what do I want to think about? What will help move me from here? So I went to my standby, which is everything's always working out for me. And then I went, what else?
Yeah.
And it took me a few moments. I'm like, come on, Wendy, there's other positive things you can think about. And so, I started saying things like, well, I'm generally a very healthy person. Wellness is more about me than not. And, I live in well-being and I'm thriving. And what I love to know, even if my body is having, quote, cold symptoms, it's my body's way of doing what it wants to do in order to bring health to me. So I don't have to look at this as a bad thing. It's like if there's something in my body that requires a little bit of extra support, my body's going for it. And so, I don't know, was that 15, 17 seconds worth? But it was enough to give me a sense of calm and feeling better. And then I kind of said to myself, okay, well, obviously I've been so focused on my symptoms. What if the next time I recognized I was focused on the symptoms, I just immediately did a turnaround and said, everything's always working out for me, my body loves to be healthy, or something along that line. And that felt good. So as I was sleeping, you know, whenever I'd wake up and have to blow my nose or something like that, I would just tell myself, you know, hey, everything's always working out for me. My body's doing what it wants to do in order to bring me health. All is well. And so that in itself, to me, was a big win, because I know in the past when I've had cold symptoms, I can now go back and recognize how so obsessed I was with focusing on the symptoms.
Sure.
You know, and I feel like I kind of broke through that, where even if I were to have cold symptoms in the future, I don't think I'll be quite as obsessed, because it really stuck out to me that it was so unusual for my life and my lifestyle to be so bizarrely negatively focused. So,
well, yeah,
anyway,
you definitely deserve
that was my win,
congratulations.
that I recognized
That
what
is
I'd been
good.
doing.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's definitely a win. I totally put that in the win column. And in fact, as you're telling that story, I'm realizing we've actually had a few people here, the co-hosts on the show. Cindy was kind of laid up for a number of days there. She was really suffering, and David got sick too. And you know, this is the time of year when you always get somebody saying that it's going around, right? Well, I
hear it all the time, but I don't believe in it.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, I kept going out to, you know, go on my walks or, you know, go out on errands or whatever, and I'd get that little quick thought about it's going around, or David got sick or Cindy got sick, and instantly, I didn't even have to do anything. This is definitely a win. Instantly, my mind was saying, well, thank goodness I'm well. Instantly. I mean, I didn't even have to think about it. It just came, well, I'm in great shape. I'm feeling really healthy, even if it wasn't necessarily true. I mean, I did that one day when there was like a gale wind at about 20 degrees blowing in my face, which made it feel like minus 20, and I was saying, well, at least I'm healthy.
Well, you know, I had lunch with somebody on Saturday, and we had postponed the lunch because he hadn't been feeling good during the week. And so when we started lunch, he said, you know, pardon me if I'm doing a little bit of sniffling, you know, because I really don't want you to get sick. And I remember thinking, as well as saying out loud, I said, oh, I'm healthy, all is well. And so, and I really, truly believe that, because there have been people sneezing in my face before, and I still don't get sick. I mean, I'm a very healthy person. I think, one, I have a healthy constitution, but two, I know my thoughts help to support the idea of me being healthy.
Oh, yeah.
So it was interesting, though, because last night, just for a moment, I went, oh, my God, maybe I got sick because he was sick. And I went, Wendy, you don't even believe that. But
I love that.
But it was just so surprising to me that those thoughts can just pop in. And I'm like, well, where did that come from? And I went, well, I have been hearing a lot of people lately, just like you, talking about the cold season and the flu season. And I know 2 people who have reported to me that they got flu shots and then they got the flu. And, you know, so it's kind of like, without really even recognizing it, the conversation of that has been out there, and I've been subject to it, if you will.
Exposed to it, anyway.
And, yeah, and not that I went out of my way to go, oh, I can't think those thoughts. But at the same time, I'm aware that people have been talking about it a lot, and maybe I was a little bit more focused on it than I realized. But it was really funny when I'm like, oh, my God, I got the cold from him over the weekend. I'm like, you don't believe that.
I think that's the line of the day. Wendy, you don't believe that. That's the best sentence that I've heard all week. That's great. I love that one.
Oh, does that mean that we just beat the morning show?
Yeah, I think we beat the morning show already. Right. We just did it. Sorry, Joel. We just wiped it out with one line.
Okay, Joel, we're throwing the baton back to you.
Of course, I guess we have to do that for the entire show, because that's the way the whole show went this morning. But okay, that's another thing. Anyway.
But yeah, I mean, what do you do when you know you don't believe something and yet you start to just examine it and it pops up automatically. It's like, that to me was so bizarre. It's like, you don't believe that, and you know you don't.
You treated that so beautifully, though. You just dismissed it. You weren't angry at yourself or anything. You just kind of mocked it a little bit to laugh at yourself, and that shook it off. That was good.
That really was probably the best laugh I had.
Yeah.
Concerning all the cold symptoms, because that really, really made me giggle, because I know I don't believe that, just because someone's sick, you're going to get sick.
And by the way, for anyone who wonders if the story really worked out, they can hear in Wendy's voice, she's not exhibiting cold symptoms, so clearly it worked.
But, here's a thought that just did pop into me. There is I'll call it an old wives' tale.
Okay.
That if you're out in the cold and you don't have proper attire, that you'll get sick.
Oh, right, yeah.
Now, science has proven that is, you cannot get sick because of a temperature change. Now, that doesn't mean you can't get hypothermia under bizarre circumstances, but the average person walking outside when it's really cold, or even if your neck is not covered by a scarf and, the wind is blowing, that is not a way that people get sick.
And by the way, I want to make it clear that Wendy is not endorsing what I see so many teenagers do, which is where they're walking out in their short sleeves and their shorts in 35-degree weather and walking around town. That's not what she's talking about.
Well, and so I have been noticing, I have noticed this in my own thoughts, that as I've gone out to get the mail, or I've gone outside for other things, sometimes I do it where, no, I'm not in shorts, but I do just throw on a really heavy wool coat, and I'm not really prepared for the weather other than I threw on a heavy wool coat. And I knew I wasn't going to be outside for about 3 minutes. And right. I thought to myself, other people would think, Wendy, you're going to catch the death of cold because you're not properly dressed. And I've probably had that thought a minimum of 12 times over the last week.
Wow.
And so I don't believe, quote, I got cold symptoms because of how I was dressed when I went outside, but I will say I was entertaining those thoughts almost as a joke, but it was something I had focused on a lot.
Yeah, okay. Well,
that's probably how I drew it to myself. That's
that could be. That would certainly make sense because of what we know about how the LOA works. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, okay, well, actually, the nuance that's involved in that kind of points to the topic today, really, when you think about it, because the topic is, what do you do when you get conflicting advice, and particularly if you get it through social media, because that's where more people are getting it these days anyway. But just in general, if you get, two different pieces of advice about how to handle situation X, and you're not really sure which one to follow. And I mean, you get lots of stuff in these groups. I mean, just to give you an idea, just some of the initial posts that people put in. I mean, there's one that I saw today. It says, this is all it says in the post. If no one thinks you are weird, you are doing it wrong. I'm thinking, what? What are you talking about?
Well, that's kind of it also, when people post things in Facebook, you also find out what they believe.
Yes. By
those things. So she obviously thinks that when she practices law of attraction, other people will think her weird.
Well, this is actually a male, but yes, that's true. Oh. And it also, in Facebook, it tells you whether or not somebody's a new member, and this one is a new member. So obviously this person just joined the group. And they're trying to make a splash, and, they got some likes out of it, so, they probably got the splash they were looking for. But I agree with one of the commenters saying, I still don't get it. So you get stuff like that. Now, here's another one, and interestingly enough, this person hasn't gotten any comments. Usually comments happen pretty quickly, and this person's comment was made, their post was made 15 minutes ago without any comments. But she wrote, I have asked God a couple times now for a sign that my manifestation will happen eventually when the time is right, but I'm just not seeing anything. And then she put up an upside down, a frown face. And I'm really surprised people aren't jumping on that. That's usually the one where you get 20 comments in a minute, but that's not what happened in this case. So
let's play this little game here. What would you have expected that other people might have said to her in response to that?
Oh, some of the typical things that you get are, well, first of all, you usually get a number of people who just commiserate, say, that's exactly what's happened to me lately. So it's the Me Too kind of comments. You get a lot of those. You get some people who will suggest, well, focus on what it is that you want. Some of them will perhaps take it a little step further. They'll say, focus on what you want and do it often and try to keep yourself focused on it. So other people will say, well, focus on it, but don't focus on it too long, because if you focus on it too long, you won't get it. So you can see they're trying to put the advice out that matches what their understanding is. It's just not necessarily complete in those cases. Yeah.
Well, and I don't, I'm not involved in the Facebook Law of Attraction groups, but I am involved in a couple Law of Attraction groups on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say to some level, some of the people are a little bit more sophisticated in their responses, and the reason is because it is an Abraham Hicks Law of Attraction group.
Right, okay.
But every now and then I find something that I'm like, well, that's pretty funky, you know. And really, the longer I've been involved with, you know, using Law of Attraction deliberately, the more I've recognized, you know, exactly what we're talking about. There is some conflicting information, but I really think the conflict comes more from never really understanding the foundational premises. Like, I'll give you an example. And I remember this years ago when Oprah was still on her daily show. And I think this was probably an Abraham thing that kind of woven into our societal cultural expectations, and it's what people started doing, even though people probably didn't know it came from Abraham. But when Abraham introduced the concept of if you focus on something for as little as 17 seconds, Law of Attraction will begin to bring you other like thoughts of a similar nature.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do it 4 times the 17,
right,
you actually start to manifest things in 3-dimensional form.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a good thing if you're wanting to manifest something that you deliberately desire. But what started to happen, and I remember this so distinctly when watching Oprah, you know, the guests would be on the stage, and they'd be talking about something negative, and in mid-sentence they'd recognize they just said something that was negative, and they would literally say out loud, cancel, cancel, cancel. Because it's like they wanted to hold the words back before heaven forbid, Law of Attraction, to get a hold of those negative words, and off goes a cascading negative effect.
Right.
And I mean, I don't know. I suppose there could be a little bit of truth to, you know, if you get on a negative jag for too long, you could definitely bring it into your world.
Well, sure. Yeah.
But somebody just saying to you, well, you need to be positive. You need to be positive, and that's going to help you manifest what you want. Just be positive. That is one that, to me, is a very surface-level comment. And the reason I say that is because the underlying principle is the Law of Attraction doesn't know what your words are. The Law of Attraction is only able to gauge the vibrational quality of what you feel when you're speaking those words.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people are not even aware, because they haven't even thought about it yet, to become aware that when they're saying something that, yes, they're using positive words, that oftentimes they're actually feeling a negative energetic vibration because they're really sad or upset or frustrated because they don't have this positive thing that they're saying.
Yes.
Are you following me?
Yeah, oh, definitely. In fact, I've experienced it, so that's why I'm curious to know where you're going to go with it.
Well, and I just wanted to, highlight that point. So, okay, I'll just use me as an example. If I say, oh, no, I'm healthy, but maybe outside of my awareness, I'm saying that with a whole lot of vehemence because I'm really afraid I'm going to get sick.
Right.
Or I know I have a big meeting, in 2 days, and I have to be healthy for that. And so I may not be aware that I'm actually speaking the positive words with a lot of resistance underneath it.
Yes.
And so I have learned for myself that it's a little bit of an art, if you will, to start to identify it for yourself when you're not congruent, where your words are saying one thing, but your feelings are saying something else.
Right, exactly.
And so I know, for a long time, my mother would send me an email about some difficulty going on in her life, and she'd she would say, well, I'm doing my best to speak positively, but here's all these bad things that are happening.
Yeah, and she just defeated it, right?
Yeah, and so it was not an easy thing through email, but I did my best to try to convey it's not the words. It's are you able to even identify or figure out what you're feeling when you're saying these things? And, for a long time she goes, no, I feel good. And I'm like, okay, if it was really all good, you'd be getting positive results.
Right.
That's what I know.
Sure.
And I also know if I were talking to her on the phone and she would be using the positive words, I could actually sense energetically, I'm like, yeah, I don't think those words are really congruent.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it takes quite a bit of effort to, I don't want to say convince her of what I felt like I was saying was true, but to get her to even have the awareness.
Right, because that's the hard part, and that's what you're ultimately hoping is going to happen, that she decides to become aware of it and pay attention to it.
Yes.
And
I mean, she's doing so much better with that now.
Which is great. That's fantastic.
It took a lot of time, and whether it's my mother or anybody else, it takes some time because it's a skill that you have to develop to really understand whether your words are congruent with what you're saying. Yeah.
Which means really you're tapping into, as honestly as you can, what am I really feeling? And that's why I liked when you talked about how you were kind of catching yourself on I'm feeling sick, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that, and then, wait a minute, Wendy, you don't even believe that. I love that. But then you followed it up with, what is it that makes you feel happy? And that, to me, that's my favorite response. What makes you feel happy? Not what do you think positively about, but what makes you feel happy? Because they're not necessarily the same thing. It's very hard to say that I feel happy about something when I really don't feel happy about it. It's much easier for me to say I believe in something positive and not deep down not really believe in it. Not that it is impossible. It's just so much harder to do. So it's a much safer bet from my perspective to say, what makes you feel happy? And I can almost always tell that I was right about that because it takes a long time for the response to come back because they're processing it, right? They're trying to think, well, what does make me happy? And it can take a while. It can take a long time. I mean, if you're far enough away, it may even be almost too much of a question to ask if you're really far away from it. Maybe you have to ask, like, what makes you feel better, just so you can get to the range where you can get to feel happy.
Exactly. And that was the exact point I was going to make.
Yeah.
For some people, using the word happy may just not even be a word that they know how to process.
Yeah, it can be too much sometimes.
Kind of like play around with other words. Now, I will tell you, for me, happy was something I grew into. Happy was not a word that I used very much in the past. But probably my go-to is the word good.
Okay.
Because I know if I feel good versus not good. So
yeah, sure. I mean, I think of it as I prefer versus not preferring, but it's essentially the same thing. If it's good, I like it.
It is. It is. It's just that the word good would stimulate probably a faster response if you were to ask me a question versus happy.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not saying between you and me I'm debating it. I'm just making the point in general.
Yeah.
For other people who are listening who may think, well, good is not a word to relate to. I don't know if I relate to happy. But like you said, better might be a word.
Better's not bad, yeah. Yeah, better has a lot more potential because that's going to cover a lot more of the emotional range.
So it's kind of like whatever word works for you, go with that.
Right.
And obviously for you, the word happy does work because I hear you use it quite often. That's a positive thing for you.
It works, and it was the route that I took to get out of depression. When I was in the depressed state and it seemed like every single thought that came through my head was negative, and I don't really think I was exaggerating when I'm saying that. It really was. Every thought coming through my head was negative. I couldn't find any positive thoughts. My goal at that point was to get happy. Because I knew if I could get myself into a happy place and start feeling happy regularly, then all these negative momentums would turn around and dissipate and get replaced with positive momentums, and what I wanted would start manifesting, and my life would feel better, and I'd be enjoying life better and all that other good stuff. So, happy became my mantra. And it was really what drove me to keep going, trying to find what made me happy. I didn't even know at first. I couldn't even have told you when I was in that place what made me happy. I remember there were times when Louise and I would be talking, and Louise would be asking me, so what would you like to do? What would you love? And I would sit there blank. I had no answer. That's how bad it can get. So to me, finding happy, that was like nirvana. If I could find happy, oh my goodness.
Well, and just to kind of make sense of perhaps why it was hard to find happy was because, when you talked about being depressed for so long and having so many negative thoughts, law of attraction was providing all sorts of negativity for you.
Very well, I might add.
Because that's what you were focused on, there was a lot of momentum on
there
feeling
certainly was.
Not happy.
Oh, boy, there was a ton of it.
Yeah, so when you started asking, or your wife was asking, well, what would make you happy, I totally get why that was so difficult to find a happy thought.
Yeah.
Because you were so in a non-happy space.
Very, very so, yeah. Very, very much so. And that's where better actually does work. What can you do to feel better? And I didn't really use better at that point in time. I can't remember exactly what I used, to be perfectly honest. But what I did try to use was kind of equivalent to better. What would be nicer? What would be more pleasant? I think those were some of the words that I was using. And I remember I've told this story many times. The thing that kind of got me going was my wife suggesting, well, you like to go take walks. Go out, and while you're on your walk, just appreciate nature up close. Look at the details and just notice all the details, which was better than focusing on all the negatives out there. It wasn't joyous. It wasn't, oh boy, I can't wait to look at the details of the plants. It wasn't that at all. But it was better,
But would you say that starting to walk and then starting to do it on a more regular basis is kind of what anchored you out of depression?
Well, I was already walking, actually. I had been walking I've been taking walks pretty much since we've been married and even before that. So we're talking 20 to 25 years now.
Wow.
And the depression was about 10 to 12 years ago.
So were you not walking during the time you were feeling depressed?
There were periods of times when that was happening, just for a number of reasons that were kind of outside my control at the time. So I wasn't walking as often, and I was missing that. But that was just fueling the downward depression. It wasn't helping anything.
Got it. So walking was something that you did enjoy, at least on some level, and
yeah.
So that helped while you were in a state of feeling depression. When you started walking, it helped you to start to feel a little bit better because you are anchored to feeling better or
right.
feeling good when you walk.
Yes, exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It does. Well, since the topic is conflicting advice,
mm-hmm.
One of the things that for me as a life coach, I struggled with this for a number of years, where I have, quote, my process of how I help people move from where they are to where they want to go. And before I ever learned Law of Attraction, I knew NLP and some other modalities.
Uh-huh.
And so those kind of were the first things I learned, and that's how I learned to really help people transform. Well, then, of course, once I learned Law of Attraction, I added a lot of that because I found that to actually be easier to help people understand how they can take what they're getting from me and go forward with it for the rest of their lives. So it's not just we're going to help you in this one area, but I feel like I'm giving them tools that will serve them well forever. But one of the tools that I use is oftentimes I'll ask somebody, like if I start to hear certain things and what they're talking about, I might get an intuitive sense that there was something in childhood that actually prompted this belief or this thing that was not serving them. And so I might ask them some childhood questions. Now, I will tell you, I don't dwell there. And I tell to people up front, I may ask you a few questions because there could be some prime information that could help us get this cleared out. But I promise you, we're not going to go there. I'm not going to ask you to, relive the whole thing and cry all over again. Well, over and over, I would hear Abraham say, you don't have to trace a problem back to its origin. You can start where you are, and you can clean it up from there. Well, why that was conflicting for me was because I felt like since they kept telling people over and over, you don't have to go backwards, you don't have to find the place of origin, I felt like, and this was probably just how I took it, because I wanted to be a really good, Law of Attraction teacher.
Oh, sure.
I felt like, there must be something wrong with my process. I must be missing something. I must be, like I'm resistant to giving up the process that I know has worked for me for years with both myself and others. And so to me, that felt like conflicting information, because every time I heard Abraham say, you don't have to go backwards, you can use whatever circumstances is causing you distress today to clean up that vibration, I thought I was doing something wrong. And so to me, that felt conflicting. But when I was on the Cancun land cruise, I had internalized the question that I wanted to get resolution on this thing that I considered a conflict of interest. Because if there was a better way to do something where people didn't have to talk about anything from their past, I wanted that to be available to me. But if it was, I didn't know how to do it.
Oh, sure, yeah.
One day, the land cruise was 5 days, or 5 days of Abraham workshops, and I remember on the third day going in, and as Esther comes out on the stage and people are applauding for her, I just heard inside of me, all the questions that you've just asked will be answered today. And I was like, woohoo, that's exciting.
Really?
And all of a sudden, yeah, so Esther, goes into her Abraham thing. She starts speaking as Abraham. And one of the sentences she said was, and it might not have been in the preamble, but it was like sometime throughout that morning, the issue came up about negative things and somebody needing to clean up their vibration. And I heard Abraham say, do whatever it takes to clean up this vibration. It doesn't matter what you do, and this might be a little bit more of the difficult work, but do whatever it takes to clean this up. And somehow those words, do whatever it takes, penetrated my understanding. And all of a sudden, there was like a clarity for me that allowed me to recognize there was nothing wrong with the processes that I'd been using.
Mm-hmm.
I assumed the meaning of Abraham saying you don't have to go back into your past to clear up this vibration. I assumed the meaning that they were saying don't go back into your past.
Not the same thing, though.
They didn't say don't. They just said, now I heard it, do whatever it takes, and you don't have to go back into the past. And I went, oh, son of a gun. Huh. And I mean, that changed it for me. And I realized I don't go back into the past hardly at all anyway, but when I feel like that's the direction I'm being guided to go, I no longer have this struggle thing inside of me like, oh, my God, I'm doing something where it's not the easy way, and I'm making myself miserable over it.
Well, what you're talking about is something that Louise brought up a number of times, because Louise, as I think I've told you in our audience, for about 10 years was a psychotherapist and was trained in psychotherapy and was actually very good at it. She had a very good track record. But one of the things that kind of made the law of attraction theory as presented by Abraham difficult to her was this issue that you're bringing up, because she really firmly believed if you don't root out something that's like a deep down thing, you can try to attract all you want. You'll never get into the right vibration to achieve what you're trying to attract. So again, the same dichotomy. How deep do you go? Should you root out something that's really bad from your past in order to get past it and so forth? And I think you answered it very eloquently. I think Abraham answered it very eloquently. Do whatever you have to do. I mean, there is an instance of that. We're talking about the groups on Facebook. There was a person who posted something just a few hours ago, and I'll paraphrase it because, quite honestly, what they wrote was pretty disjointed. It's very clear this person is not in a good place at all. And plus, English isn't their first language anyway, so that just compounds it a bit. But this person, among other things, was talking about feeling unworthy, feeling suicidal, experiencing suicidal thoughts, having bursts of depression and anger that she expressed to her parents, and then later apologizing for it. And the parents didn't really know what to do, and how when she has these dreams, other things aren't regarding her family are happening. She doesn't understand why. Negative thoughts are coming to her mind all the time. I mean, this is clearly a person who's got something really, really, really difficult going on, some sort of really deep pain going on. And it's somebody. My advice to her was, when you're starting to to think suicidal thoughts, don't go to an LOA group. The first thing you need to do is find a good therapist and just root that out. Because until you root that out, you're just going to get haunted by it. You got to get past that. Then, once you found out what that is and the therapist is helping you figure out what your path out is, that's the time to apply LOA principles, because now you got your way out. But first you got to get at the thing, find out what it is. That was my point to her. But I also saw people who were commenting to her, well, you just have to get yourself into a good frame of mind, and you have to do this and that, all the LOA stuff. And I'm thinking, this is a person who's having suicidal thoughts. That's a very serious situation. You can't just throw basic LOA theory at that. You have to address the suicidal thoughts. It's primary.
Well, no, I mean, there is an understanding of how law of attraction could actually benefit her.
Oh, of course.
But going from one extreme of suicide, which is about the lowest vibrational broadcast you can have, to just think positive thoughts, which is so far away from where she is, it's like she can't even hear that, let alone process it.
Exactly.
And so even, if somebody were to just say something to comfort her, this would be the place with the Me Too, like I have felt that way before, and I know it really sucks being where you are. Hopefully things can get better, but I get it that right now it doesn't feel very good.
Yeah.
And having somebody just witness them and, in that way, sometimes a person can, like a person who's feeling suicidal, can grab just a little bit of that because it's not so far away from where they are at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, most of the time I think most law of attraction people or anybody who's in the positive psychology movement would want to say, well, you want to offer positive advice. But if somebody's in a really negative place, they can't receive. You cannot receive something that's so far away from where you currently are.
Yeah.
And that's why, you probably watch shows like I have at movies, where somebody's suicidal and they call suicide prevention hotline.
Mm-hmm.
And the typical thing, which I am in agreement with, is where instead of saying, oh, my God, whatever you do, don't kill yourself, they'll want to know what's going on. Why are you feeling this way? Which, again, traditional LOA would say, oh, you don't want to talk more negativity. But if they're talking, that's movement.
Yes.
It may be movement with their mouth, with their head. At least they're in movement, because the thoughts of suicide can be the most stuck thoughts you can have.
And actually, somebody who is truly suicidal and on the brink of it, the most telling signal is that they shut up.
Correct. They shut up. They don't talk to anybody. So to me, if somebody even reaches out to a suicide hotline, that's their way of saying, I really don't want to do this thing that I say I'm wanting to do, and this is my way of showing it, or I wouldn't have called.
Yeah.
So in a way, they're saying, I'm open to what you have to say to me. It's just that, the people in suicide hotlines are being trained. Don't just throw happy smiley faces at them verbally.
Yeah, because they're not in the place to receive it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say when I've read other people's things where they're giving advice, probably the most inappropriate thing I have ever read has been where somebody's in one state of mind and somebody throws platitudes at them. That's like so far off from where they are emotionally that they can't receive it, or they get pissed off at it. And sometimes it even becomes I knew nobody would understand because look at all these stupid things that people are saying to me.
Yeah, it's one of those things that can actually work the opposite of what the person thinks is going to happen by giving out the advice that they gave in the first place. It produces the opposite result, which is it's that can actually be kind of shocking and surprising when you think about it. And there are a lot of different ways that can happen. It can happen in situations where it seems perfectly reasonable and normal to conclude that if you say A, it's going to lead to B, and then it doesn't. Joel and I were talking about that this morning. At one point, he reiterated a story that he's told before about how he was a gambling addict. He was a raging gambling addict. He had stolen money to support his habit, and he was going to get arrested and was appearing before the judge and so forth. And when he appeared before the judge, he said to the judge, I'm guilty. And his defender was a public defender was saying, shut up, don't say anything. He says, no, I'm guilty. I'm ready to face whatever the consequences are. I want all this to be done. I want it to be over with. And when they put him in the jail cell and locked the door, his response was, thank God, finally this has come to an end, because his biggest fear was he was going to get thrown in jail. Now it was there, so the biggest fear was no longer a fear. It was a reality, but it was no longer a fear. And so his perception of that whole experience was completely different from what my perception of it might have been if I was watching him go through it, saying, oh, poor Joel. I mean, he's been thrown in prison. And Joel's reaction was, thank goodness.
Now, I've never been imprisoned. However, I do understand the concept behind Joel's idea, because I've had things where I had a huge fear. And when the very thing that I feared the most had come upon me, I was able to go, okay, this isn't as bad as I thought. I'm still here. I'm still alive. The consequences, wait a minute, there aren't even any consequences. Then I'm like, who the heck taught me that this is a fear? And I'd figure it out, and I'd just kind of laugh at it, thinking, this was not even something I needed to fear. And the very fact that I feared it for so long actually continued the resistance on this thing that didn't let me get free of the very object that I feared. So once I did the thing I feared, the fear immediately dissipated.
Yeah, that's an interesting phenomenon that happens. And I actually learned that one very early, long before I learned law of attraction. Ever since I can remember, dating back to my teenage years, for whatever reason, people, friends, acquaintances, people who barely knew me felt like they could just confide in me about stuff, which shocked the hell out of me because I had no idea why they were doing it. I didn't have a clue. I'll even tell you, there was a situation when I was in school. My first year of school, I went to the State University of New York at Buffalo, and they had a new campus, relatively new. It's still called the new campus in Amherst. And at that campus, there were these kind of avant-garde style architecture buildings that were the dorms. They were primarily dormitories. There were also a few classrooms, but it was mostly just dormitory living. And each of them had this one tower. There's no other way to describe it. It was like a castle tower. Most of the buildings were like 3 or 4 stories, but the tower would go up 10 stories, and there were rooms just off of that tower up there. So it was a very strange-looking architecture. And I remember one time just deciding to ride up the elevator to the 10th floor just to kind of have a look around of one of those towers, right? And I'm up there, and I see this person who's really not looking very well at all. Come to find out, this person was considering jumping off the building. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what have I walked into? I didn't know what to do. And so I just kind of stood there, and he was talking to me, and so I just started talking to him. And he started spilling out his problems and so forth, and I'm riveted, like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? So I just kept listening because I didn't know what else to do, right? Bottom line, long story short, and it is a very long story, but eventually I talked him down. And I never saw him again, so I never really knew what happened. But from that point on, I kept experiencing people just confiding stuff in me, and it really, really confused me. But what I did learn very early on is, because of my own curiosity, I would ask them, so what do you think is going to happen? And they'd say, well, ABC, and ABC, certainly seemed to be pointing in a negative direction, and not really sure what they thought about. I'd say, well, so what happens after ABC? And they'd say, well, DEF. And then I'd say, well, what happens after DEF? And they'd say, well, it's DEF. I mean, come on. I said, yeah, but what happens after DEF? And they'd say, I don't know. And then I could see it dissipating just the way you were describing. And I said, whoa, that worked. What did I just do? I didn't know what I had done. It took me a while to realize what the pattern was, that if I just asked them to look at what the worst possible scenario was, they would find the worst possible scenario wasn't all that bad after all. And so I used that for the longest time whenever I had people who would approach me out of the blue and say, start talking to me and spilling out their guts. And I never did find out why they do that, but that was my go-to when I needed to talk to somebody who was like, so what's the next worst thing that happens, right?
And to me, honestly, that's one of the tools that I use when I'm working with people.
Is it really?
If they really have a huge fear of something, I'll say, well, tell me, what's the worst thing that you can imagine would happen in this situation? And sometimes I could almost hear them like holding their breath, like, really? You're wanting me to tell you that?
Yeah, right.
That you're supposed to be like taking me in the opposite direction? But if I could get them to say out loud what the worst case scenario is, and we just talk about it, and then we reframe some parts of it, we find out it's not so horrible. The fear was worse than what they thought would really happen, because the fear kind of blocks what would really happen if.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
Yeah.
I could see why that would work, but that's very cool that you created a little sphere of influence that, you know, people talked to you and ended up feeling better after doing so.
Now, at the same time, I have to say, I wonder what my own thought process was that I kept drawing these people to me because I've not figured that one out, and I probably don't want to know, actually, because that would mean recreating the thought process. But there must have been something going on that was attracting them, because I got it a lot. I had a lot of people come to me like that. So, now, I haven't used that.
I wonder what was going on inside of you that maybe you didn't want to look at for your own stuff, but you were projecting it outside of you so that other people would do it.
I'm not really sure. And, I mean, I do remember, it's been a while since I've used that technique, but the last time I used it was on myself, really. My wife was trying to help me, and she used the same technique on me and encouraged me to do it because she knew I had done it in the past. So I started applying it, and that's when I realized that I was depressed about stuff. But when I looked at the stuff, it wasn't worth being depressed about. And I wasn't sure what to do about that. I wasn't sure what to do with that. Like, okay, on the one hand, the stuff that I'm being depressed about in the grand scheme of things really doesn't amount to very much. On the other hand, I'm depressed about it. What the heck do I do with that? Because I was on the other side of the coin there, you know? I was the one who needed to figure out, okay, so I've gotten there, now what do I do with it? And I didn't have an answer. Fortunately, my wife had some good ideas. So she, being a psychotherapist, she gave me some guidance, but I didn't know what to do with it. I had no clue. I mean, once you get there, it does break the pattern, but in and of itself, it doesn't heal you. So I needed to figure out what the healing was, and that's ultimately what she helped me to do. Yeah. But you can certainly agree, I think we can both agree that that's the kind of thing that if somebody tries to help somebody else in a group and they don't really know what they're doing. I mean, I got kind of lucky with that one guy because I could have very easily given bad advice or done the wrong thing without realizing it. Maybe not. Maybe just because of who I am, because I am a listener. I mean, it's kind of built into me. So maybe that was going to save me no matter what. But it does kind of remind me, I want to be careful. I don't want to be the person who's trying to give advice all the time because my advice may not always be good. You know, I don't want to assume that I have the answer for somebody else. In fact, I'm learning more and more just how rarely I understand where the other person's coming from, even when it seems obvious. I mean, like Joel being thrown into prison 25 years ago. My take on that was, oh, poor Joel, and that was not at all what his take was on it. And he was the one being thrown in. I mean, I really misread that one.
Well, you know, this probably has nothing to do with the whole Joel thing, but it's what I'm thinking on. When you go to a Abraham Hicks event, here's what I have found almost every single time, that people there are minding their P's and Q's, meaning they don't want to say anything to a stranger that gives any impression that they don't know what they're talking about or they're not a good Abraham Hicks student. And I just think it's funny because I've been to several events and, you know, I'll get into conversation with people, and I can tell, in a sense, they're guarded because they'll start to talk, and then as soon as they say something, they'll go, "Oh, but I've learned beyond that. I'm just talking about something in the past," because it's like they're so afraid that, you know, they'll be judged as a really bad LOA student. You know.
I actually feel sorry for them that they're doing that. I feel bad for them, which I shouldn't do, but nevertheless, I feel bad for them.
I think this is just my take. I think that's somebody who's relatively new, but they've been doing it long enough that in their own minds they've judged that they should know better.
Oh, yeah. Well, we are certainly our own worst critics. There's no doubt about that, and that may be what that's an aspect of.
But you know, there was one event I went to, and I will tell you, I for the most part, I'm not that judgmental of people, and I don't think I judged him. I was just really like surprised because it was right after the election, and he was on the non-Trump side of the equation, which he was on the Hillary side.
Right.
And he was so upset. I'm so upset that Trump won. And I mean, like, you could just see the grief on him.
Yeah.
Where he couldn't crack a smile for anything. And Abraham was trying to cajole him, and, you know, he was just like, but. And, you know, he's like, and there's all these LOA groups, and we don't understand it. He was identifying with huge groups of people who he felt were all, you know, in agreement with his position. And I was thinking, what groups of people is he talking about? Because I don't know who he's talking about. But, you know, that's his thing. And so Abraham went on and described, you know, the energetics behind the election. And what was really fascinating is it was a perfect opportunity for Abraham to say, for all the people that had so much resistance against Trump, they were actually helping to elect Trump.
Yes.
Which, I mean, I've heard them say that every time there's an election, but this was kind of like this guy, bless his heart, he's on stage. You could tell he couldn't accept that. He's like, but I'm so pro-love. I'm so pro-love, and he's not. And I'm thinking, well, how do you know Trump's not about love? But, okay, maybe you can say that based on things that he says. But it's still assumptions, because I still believe nobody really knows what's in the heart of any human being.
That's right.
Except for energy.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, he was making a bunch of assumptions, and it was really hard to console him. And so, but it was one of the most fascinating discussions I've ever heard Abraham have. And so when, you know, we were taking a break, I ran into him, and I was just curious. I'm like, now, what groups were you talking about? And so he was telling me, he goes, oh, they're Abraham Hicks Law of Attraction Facebook groups. And I'm like, oh, okay. And who knows, Walt? It may even be the one that you're connected with.
It's possible. I don't know.
But here's what really floored me, is he works for the Abraham Hicks organization.
Really? Interesting.
He attends every single workshop.
Wow.
And I purposely won't give away what role he does just because I keep his anonymity.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I've seen him before. And when I went to the one most recently, I ran into him and said hello. So it's like he's there. He works for that organization. He hears Abraham speaking, you know, at least at this point twice a month, if not more, because when Jerry was live, sometimes they did 5 workshops a month. But I thought, wow, you really don't know what you know until you know it.
Yeah, it's true.
And this was just an area that for him, everything that occurred defied his understanding. And he had some very strong points of view and didn't understand why, with everything he knew, that wasn't enough to change the course of the election. And he was, based on the things he was saying, and I don't say this in judgment, but these were just the factual things he was saying, it was very obvious that he was very resistant to Trump. And, you know, there was so much resistance, and Abraham was doing their best to convey that, but you know what? He wasn't receiving it.
Yeah.
It was very obvious he wasn't receiving it. Now, here's the part I marvel at. You're talking to God. Now, some people might have an issue with that, but they're source energy. They are, you know, non-physical consciousness. You are talking to infinite intelligence, and this man was not accepting what they had to say.
Yeah.
And, you know, it made me think to myself, oh, my gosh, how many times have I done that?
Exactly.
Like,
that's my thought, too.
If God could personify himself or herself and stand in front of me and say, Wendy, you're wrong, this is the way it needs to be, I still would go, no, don't think so. I think you're wrong. Because, you know, when we have some really solid beliefs in things, sometimes it takes an awful lot to shake us out of it.
It does. It does. In fact, I had the same observation. I saw a lot of people who had the reaction that guy had. They weren't all working for Abraham Hicks, but they had the same reaction, just absolutely stunned disbelief about the election. And we actually, both my wife and I have talked with some who were in that camp. And my wife came up with something right on Election Day that has stuck with me ever since. I thought she just nailed the whole situation really, really well. Because we all know what kind of a publicity hound Trump is. I mean, he stirs up controversy for a living. That's where he gets his energy from. It proves to me he really doesn't have full understanding of LOA. He has partial understanding, and I helped him, acquire his fortune. But he also does. He's missing some big pieces. It's very evident to me. But anyway, she pointed out he pretty much exemplifies somebody who has borderline personality disorder. He is constantly keeping himself in the spotlight. It's also a little bit confusing because it does sound very similar to somebody who's narcissistic. But either way that you want to look at it, this is a guy who just he lives for negative publicity. He isn't happy until he has all kinds of negative attention on him. The negative attention doesn't work against him. It works for him. He loves it. He eats it up. So my wife said, what would happen, do you think, if, now that he's won the election, if all the news media and all of his opposition stopped paying attention to him? Just stopped. I mean, think about that. It would be pretty much the end of the Trump phenomenon. And yet that was the one thing that these people who got so frustrated couldn't do. They couldn't just stop paying attention to him, could they?
People, and because you had been so emotionally invested in politics for so long, that people who are invested in politics have a huge stake in a certain point of view.
Right.
And it's very hard to shake.
It is. Yeah.
I know we just have a few minutes, but I remember telling you about how when I had worked at broadcast radio station, one of the stations was talk radio, and they did political conversation. And when I left the station and was no longer listening to it, I said my happiness quotient rised incredibly. And I didn't realize how much the talk radio for 2 years had really brought me down. And little by little, their perspectives became my perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Well, what's interesting is I'm Facebook friends with both of the political personalities that were at that station, and one of them recently, without any warning, the station owner changed their mind, and boom, he was no longer employed, and he didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to his fans, so he did via Facebook.
Right.
So he had been in Kansas City, because when he left here, I didn't know where he went. But anyway, I just responded to one of the comments that somebody had made, and it was a chance for us to kind of like connect for a moment.
Sure.
And it was nice to know he still remembered me.
Yeah.
Well, I got a private message on Facebook yesterday from him, like in the morning, and I'm like, whoa, I wouldn't have expected that. And he said, hey, the old station called me back to like be a guest host for a couple days. And he goes, so I'll be on the air tomorrow from 4 to 7. If you'll listen, maybe tell your friends. And he goes, here's the email of the program manager. And if I'm kind of hoping people will write to him to bring me back. So I thought, well, even though I don't listen to political stuff anymore, I like him. So I want to listen because I was kind of curious. So when our show was over, I tuned into him. And I'll tell you what, his show's 3 hours long. I only listened to about an hour of it. And I came to the point, I started getting a headache. I mean, splitting headache.
Wow.
And I don't think this had to do with the cold symptoms because that was not part of my symptomology. And I realized that energy is so not who I am anymore that it literally was causing this incredible discomfort. And so I turned it off, and within about an hour, the headache totally subsided, and I went, you know what? That just doesn't take me into any positive vibrations. Even though I like how this guy talks about things, I could kind of sense on a bigger energetic level of how it was tapping into so many people's opinions that were of such a negative quality that I'm like, ooh, energetically, I need to jump out of this.
Which shows just how far your own development has come since you worked at that radio station. But yeah.
That was just an interesting experience.
It is.
Yesterday.
Now, of course, as I'm looking at the clock, I found we have like 15 seconds left, so we have to cut it really short, unfortunately. And I hate to end on a sad note because that's kind of a sad note, but All I can say is
No,
tomorrow's going to be better.
It was a happy note for me because I realized how sensitive I've become.
Well, that's
to energy.
true.
So I know how to go to where it's good for me.
That's true. Well, that's true. Yeah, and you basically stopped doing what didn't feel good and started doing what felt good, which is the right thing to do. So you're right. That is the happy note. You're right. So I will draw the line there and just say that I found this to be an intriguing topic. We probably could have gone on for a couple hours, but we don't have that. So all I can say is let's just do it again tomorrow.
You got it.
All right. And we'll see you all tomorrow here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye now.